This is episode 423 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, the plans keep coming out from gubernatorial challenger Mark Ronchetti. He has put forth what he is calling the Economic Recovery and Inflation Relief Plan. It's more meat on the bones in terms of what he wants to do if elected governor. Of course, keep in mind, governors are not czars. They are not dictators, despite our governor now having unchecked power under her emergency order for on the order of 837 days, I believe, give or take. But when it comes to the economy, he will need the legislature to act in ways to help him. So the plan is fairly robust, and we're going to hit a few of the highlights. You can go to the Ronchetti campaign website, markronchetti.com, and check it out for yourself. It's about 7 pages, I see, and pretty straightforward stuff. And there's some kind of fill in the blanks details that we're not privy to based on the information released. But as a starting point, if you're a single filer under Ronchetti's plan, he would like you to be able to make up to $10,000, and if you're married, $20,000, and not pay a dime of income tax to the state of New Mexico. $40,000 and $80,000 is where things are for 2.9%, which you get into that kind of level, and you're more realistically going to pay that lower rate. Currently, once you make anywhere over $11,000 a year, you're at 4.7%, and you hit 4.9% anytime after you make $16,000 a year. After that, it's $210,000 to get you over 5.9%. So that was done a few years ago. Bill Richardson had us down to 4.9% as a top rate. Michelle Lujan Grisham and the Democrats in 2019 immediately raised the top rate on the income tax. And I would say that this is one of the things that I think I would qualify it as a political compromise with regard to the Ronchetti plan. It would be nice to have that top rate lowered, but alas, he has kept it at 5.9%. Top rates are always something that economists are looking to drop down as much as possible, but I think he doesn't want to be seen as the tool of the rich.
Yeah, yes, and it's interesting, Paul. Overall, this plan, there's a lot good in there. There's a lot of things that have been needed to be addressed forever, specifically on the income tax. Right now, the people that have a choice between living in Texas and New Mexico, those are the oil and gas executives in the Permian Basin. They already live in Texas. What would keeping this high income tax on top bracket be towards corporate executives and moving headquarters to New Mexico? Well, that's been a failing game for our state, primarily because of the gross receipts tax. So nobody wants to have their headquarters here unless they absolutely have to, like a company like PNM. And even a company like PNM moves tons of their administrative shared services, quote unquote, to places like Fort Worth to get them out of New Mexico. So I think that you're right. It's a good compromise. One of my favorites that's in here is talking about the unspent money in the capital outlay funds, where there's like $2 billion. That's been, in my mind, something that's needed to be addressed ever since I was cognizant of tax policy going on 20 years. Good luck getting that done. But, the fact that he raises it, I think that's a fantastic thing because, it's the worst of all worlds, Paul. You have tax money that's collected that then isn't spent. Mm-hmm. When it could be, should be. So, but it's allocated, to these projects. So, yeah, we need capital outlay reform badly, and that would be a fantastic way to go. So overall, this plan is good, but as you point out, you don't get to implement any of these items without legislators that will go along. And if he gets to be the governor, what approach will he take? I would say Susana Martinez, her rhetoric was strong, trying to get things passed, but she was not like the governor before her, the Republican, the veto Gary Johnson, who would veto things with reckless abandon to get what he wants. So there's if he gets to be governor, there's going to be that as well. So, but this plan, it's good. How would you contrast it to the governor's plan, which is grow government, grow regulation, or is that for another day?
We're just talking about taxes right now, but there are many other aspects to the plan, and then I'll give my 2 cents on it. He discusses the oil and gas annual rebate, $100 for every $1 billion the state receives in oil and gas revenue each year. We've talked about that previously on the podcast. And then you have the level the playing field small business plan. This is where we encounter some discussion of the gross receipts tax, talks about pyramiding. That's something that definitely we're fans of addressing, although it doesn't say exactly what the plan is. It just says on a bullet points, eliminate the layers of gross receipts taxes that small businesses pay for the services they have to purchase, also known as tax pyramiding. That sounds like it's right up our alley, but it is a top-line policy document, not a piece of legislation. Lowering the income tax paid by small businesses, so there might be some kind of reduction in those further rates. It'll be interesting. Of course, a lot of small businesses file their taxes under the individual income tax code, so that's something to consider. Maybe not corporate taxation, or both could be addressed. Cutting the gross receipts tax on an annual basis and exempting micro business from taxation. So that's the big thing with regard to small business, and I think that is a strong part of this plan. Wally, you can offer any thoughts?
No. I would just say absolutely, it is a strong part of the plan. There are two things. A lot of the small business things for existing businesses, once if these items were go into effect, they happen very quickly in terms of the impact. They're felt very, very quickly. Some of the impacting the larger companies, like the corporate income tax, those have to go into effect, but also the companies that are counting on those have to believe that they will be sustainable. So that's the other thing. So I do think when you implement these, they're great things, but sometimes you would say, oh, well, and you heard this in the Richardson administration. Well, we cut income taxes and 1,000 companies didn't just flock to New Mexico the next day. Well, that's not how it works. There has to be some level of confidence that things can be sustained and that the overall business climate is favorable enough to come to New Mexico.
Well, since you mentioned the Richardson-era tax cuts, the Rio Grande Foundation has been around long enough to have discussed and studied the Richardson tax cuts. And we actually did see a nice bump up in New Mexico's personal income levels during that time period. Of course, those who don't remember, our top income tax rate went from 8.2 down to 4.9. And so one of the things I would point out about the Ronchetti plan is, gosh darn it, if 4.9 is good enough for Bill Richardson and the Democrats back in 2003, it should be good enough for the Republicans now in 2023. But look, again, part of this is he's got to get elected first and get things through the legislature. But
to your point about even back then, so you have data that showed that it did something very positive. It was, and again, how much of it's due to that versus general conditions. But it's amazing how, people on tax increases and regulation increases and tax decreases regulation, it gets so political. They don't like to tie those two things together. They act like, oh, everything we do is just positive and there's no negatives, and everything the other side does is the opposite. But that is good to know, because I wasn't following it back that closely. But I did hear a lot. The word on the street was, "Oh, we cut taxes and that didn't work." I heard that in Santa Fe in the conference rooms all the time during the session. So
Yeah, and just to cap off that brief discussion of the Richardson era tax reductions, he also took our capital gains tax and dramatically reduced that. Now, of course, Bill Richardson was not perfect as a economic actor. He did the grocery tax swap and built us the spaceport and the rail runner, and then really what kind of brought that positive growth to a close was the 2008 national and international economic crisis, which threw the global economy into a tizzy. And, really that kind of put a damper on all economic growth and activity. And then other policies kick in. I mean, you have to understand that you're only going to get the benefit of a certain policy as long as other states aren't doing things to improve their policies, as long as other policies aren't negatively impacting outcomes. And, New Mexico, one of the sad truths about New Mexico is that when you are so reliant on oil and gas prices and production, other policies, pro-growth or anti-growth, can often be swamped and their effects mitigated by the oil and gas industry and the revenues and economic activity that they bring in, which are independent of economic policy. I've said it once, I'll say it again and 1,000 more times. If Michelle Lujan Grisham had Susana Martinez oil and gas revenue and that situation she was dealing with, Lujan Grisham would be way down in her approval ratings, and she would be up for consideration as one of the worst governors New Mexico's ever had. She has benefited from strong oil and gas revenue and been able to both enact terrible economic policies and spread the wealth around because of that oil and gas revenue. So you have to analyze these policies based on economic reality. And if Ronchetti does this kind of stuff, economics-wise, when you have a strong energy sector like we have now, he will be in a great position. Real quick, the last thing I wanted to mention, there's a lot of talk about getting people back into the workforce, which is absolutely critical. All of the above energy, eliminating roadblocks for said oil and gas industry, and also addressing medical malpractice reform. So getting more doctors working here in New Mexico, eliminating the gross receipts on them. There's a lot of other policies that may not show up in those big top line indicators, but overall, very solid stuff. Would definitely put New Mexico on a firmer economic trajectory.
Yeah, and then just my final comment about the plan is he's taken a look at a lot of areas that are impacting a lot of people. Those proposals on rural doctors, those are real. We have our healthcare, our doctor shortage here in New Mexico, and our healthcare system health is really strained right now, and you see that at every part of the system. I unfortunately, I'm at an age that I know people that go to the doctor now because things are happening, and the wait times and the headaches that we're having, and I can't imagine it's better in rural New Mexico even compared to here to Albuquerque.
No, it is definitely not. All right, moving on, but kind of related. National Review. They did an article. So this is a reported news story. Pain beyond the pump, Democrats' climate agenda threatens to destroy state budgets. And, just starting out, it is hard often for New Mexico to gain attention in national news publications and in national news stories. I mean, we get forest fire coverage. We get maybe an occasional shooting coverage or when some dignitary shows up like Biden did a while back. But Isaac Shore of the National Review did this story and quotes heavily from myself and other folks involved in New Mexico about what we just talked about, essentially, which is as the Democratic Party, broadly speaking, moves further and further to the left on anti-traditional energy sources, this, of course, being the Biden administration, but also right here at home, the Lujan Grisham administration, they put the economic prosperity and the budget of the state of New Mexico at risk. And Representative Larry Scott is quoted as well. There's talk about the ozone precursor rules adopted by the New Mexico Environmental Improvement Board, the Energy Transition Act, which we've talked about pretty regularly, and then other legislation like the so-called Clean Future Act, which would make us net zero, or say that we have to be net zero on greenhouse gases by 2050. And it's not just about New Mexico, but for once, New Mexico is kind of front and center in a national media story outlining some of the conflicting plans. We know where Lujan Grisham's heart lies. We know how she has tried to manage this so-called energy transition outside of oil and gas. And, it doesn't mean that the Energy Transition Act itself doesn't threaten New Mexico's economy if the lights start going out next summer. But, obviously the big threat is oil and gas regulations that chase that state out of New Mexico.
Yeah, and these issues and just the examples you went over, a lot of times these policies have absolutely profound impact, but they don't happen very quickly. I would liken it to if a policy is akin to a house burning down, you notice it right away. Some of these energy policies are frankly a lot more like a slow leak that is damaging your home, but you don't know it for a long time. And once you discover it, it's probably too late to do anything about it. So that's the thing we have going here. I would say that based on where the industry is, that you're not going to dramatically hurt the oil and gas industry in the current realm over the next 4 years very badly. But man, somewhere in that 3-4 and year beyond, you could find yourself in a way different ballpark. And then the other issue is, the Biden administration is holding fast on climate change as job one, and energy prices and energy reliability is not even on the radar. But as we've seen, with $4 a gallon gasoline and $5 plus diesel, what that does, as well as the inflationary impacts, these policies may not be fully implemented as well, given the tremendous pain that they are likely to extract from the citizens of the United States if not handled a little better and a little more delicately than they are being put in. And I had this thought the other day, Paul. Anytime you hear by the year whatever, we are going to have whatever zero emissions, this is net zero, whatever. That just shows that there's a word for that. It's just like wishful thinking. It's BS. It's would they like it to happen? Yeah, but does that mean it's going to happen? No, that means we haven't thought this through enough or put together plans that can get us anywhere close to that. We're just throwing that out there, throwing the spaghetti, see if it sticks to the wall, and if it does, we'll keep doing it. But as we've seen, just in the short term, like on the San Juan generating station, oh yeah, we can deal without that. Well, they need it for this summer. There are a lot of more of those things to come with regard to energy policy in the New Mexico area as well as the country.
Yeah, and just to quickly wrap that whole thing up, you can do a lot if you want to. If carbon emission reduction is a top policy goal, it's one thing to implement a rational, reasonable plan to dramatically reduce New Mexico's CO2 emissions through perhaps a combination of natural gas plants replacing coal and nuclear facilities as well. Throw in some wind and solar to balance out the natural gas, which is a very flexible fuel source. But just going whole hog down the path of so-called renewables, as this administration has done, is a real problem. And while we've talked about Lujan Grisham not coming hammer and tongs after oil and gas, these ozone rules are certainly part of that. The Biden administration has come hammer and tongs after oil and gas, and we've seen the results of that in terms of prices. But I shudder to think what she will do in her second term if she were to receive one. Speaking of policy at the state and federal level, economically speaking, the Bureau of Labor Statistics came out with their latest June unemployment rates. Again, New Mexico saw a modest decline in its unemployment rate. There is not a state in the nation with an unemployment rate above 5%, which New Mexico does still have the highest at 4.9%, and we have for the last 7 months. So that's definitely not a good thing. But in terms of employment and people being able to find jobs, if indeed they genuinely want them, there is no Hakuna Matata, as they say. It's good times if you're out looking for a job in New Mexico and around the country. Now, we still do have the highest rate. Utah is at 2.0%. They're one of the lowest in the entire nation. Our other neighbors also very low. Oklahoma 2.9, Arizona 3.3, Colorado 3.4, and Texas at 4.1. So, we're obviously, as a country, jobs and job availability are not issues. Inflation and kind of the spiraling cost of things, those are the big issues that we face. And I don't know if you're, I'm a pretty religious Albuquerque Journal reader. I think people are probably aware of that. But they did, in the Journal this week, Matthew Narvaez, Thursday of last week, had an article, Low Labor Force Participation Very Concerning. And this was a discussion with the Department of Workforce Solutions at the state level, talking about issues in our workforce participation rate.
Yeah, and we have talked about that a lot during 2022, and really even before then. That is good that was discussed. I actually heard about the presentation before it came out in the Journal, just because I know someone who is there at that, and I think it's good that the legislators hear about that, because that is a very important issue for the state.
Yeah, and it talks about the decline in workforce participation rate and the pandemic, but one of the big causes, Yolanda Cordova, with the Secretary of Workforce Solutions, she talked about survivors and old age and survivors disability insurance, and most of that's disability insurance. And specifically, she talks about substance abuse and treatment facilities. She says it would be great if those had a work component to it, so that people can go through drug and alcohol recovery and also transition into employment. Seems pretty commonsensical that you would have some kind of training and effort to push people in drug treatment programs to get into the workforce, but it just shows how challenged our state and government in general can be in trying to move the needle and getting people to go back to work. And I think it's it may be, when all is said and done, a decade or 2 decades from now, that one of the big long-term impacts of COVID-19 is that it really pushed a lot of people who are on the border in terms of the workforce out of the workforce. Yeah. And nobody is experiencing that quite like New Mexico has.
Yes, and she talked about something that I think is an underappreciated issue. Once someone tends to go on disability, they tend to never come back. It's a little bit like during the Clinton era, we had unemployment and how to keep people from being on unemployment for too long, get them back in the workforce. But that's not something that's really baked in very well to the disability program. And these things, there are issues with regard to all this. When you have a drug problem and your drug problem causes disability, and if you never get off of drugs, you are never going to get off of the disability rolls and come back into the workforce. And so there are certainly carrot aspects, things that make it good for people to get on disability, but it doesn't seem like there's many forces pushing things the other way.
Yeah, and I agree with you on disability. It's very tough to come up with good, solid, and humane policy prescriptions that can be enforced on a widespread basis, because there are certainly some number of people who need and have developed serious disabilities, but there are others who are clearly taking advantage of the system. And so here's a data point in the article, the Albuquerque Journal. In 1999, so going back over 20 years now, there were 30,940 New Mexicans on disability. That number jumped by 2020 to 61,294. So basically doubling in the span of 2 decades, which, in the scope of a lot of government programs, doubling in 20 years is kind of But this is a number of people, and even though our population's gone up since '99, it's not gone up that much.
And the aging of our population.
And we've aged. Yeah. But on the flip side, the number of physically intense jobs and the relative need for people to be on their feet and working in those jobs, that's continued to decline. Heavy manufacturing has declined. So, I think it's safe to say, when all is said and done, that a lot of this is driven by drug and alcohol abuse. There's no question. And it can be hard to overcome those challenges. Certainly people, even with drug and alcohol problems, can remain in the workforce and be productive citizens otherwise. So, I do think there has to be a serious conversation, and you're not going to see this in a Ronchetti or Michelle Lujan Grisham economic plan, but a serious conversation about limiting the welfare and safety nets. Some of them we don't have control over, but a lot of them that we do. How can we make them serve the people who really need it, but not be so good as to attract more people into them that don't need it? And that is a very, very difficult question when you especially come to any government policy.
Yeah, because Paul, there's been talk about in the past about you need to be tested for illegal drugs to qualify for, unemployment, or, but you propose something like that, the uproar about, it's interesting. Drug abuse is a disease when, the disease model of drug abuse is that you can't do anything about it. So to make somebody have to quit being an abuser of drugs to get a benefit, that has not made it very far. But something that has a flavor of that, if there's not something that's pushing along towards that way, I just don't know how you would ever move it the other direction.
Yeah. Now, in new data from, I want to say, the Republican Governors Association or some GOP-aligned group, but they did a look, and we've talked about this in the past, job recovery data. Number one state that has recovered jobs since COVID-19, Utah, 162.9% of jobs recovered. So they have more than replaced all the jobs that were lost during COVID. And this, of course, is with an eye towards Republican governors, which doesn't always mean you're a red state per se, but Utah, definitely a red state. Idaho is second. Texas, Montana, Tennessee, I would say those all qualify as rock-ribbed Republican states. North Carolina previously had a Republican governor, is a pretty conservative state. They're the sixth leading state in terms of jobs recovered since COVID. And then you get back to more traditional red states, Georgia, Florida, Arizona, South Dakota, and Arkansas. So really 10 out of the top 11 performing states. Then you got Colorado, which seems to always manage to slide in there no matter how blue they get. Of course, thank you, Tabor, Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. Then South Carolina, Indiana, and Nevada, I think, is the one state that they've done a lot. They really went hard on COVID, and they've become a more Democrat friendly state. It'll be interesting to see what shakes loose in Nevada this election, if that state has kind of moved into the comfortable Democrat column or not. But anyway, those are the top 15. And in terms of governors, North Carolina, Colorado, and Nevada are the three Democrat states that have restored their jobs, more jobs than they lost since COVID. New Mexico, I'm quite confident, is down at the very bottom of that list. And I would only add that Colorado and Nevada are the only true kind of blue states in that list. So definitely conservative governance leading to job restoration.
Yes, and we have a long way back. The other thing with a place like Nevada that was so dependent on tourism,
Exactly.
and they were way, way, way down. Well, when you're way down, it's easier mathematically to come back up quickly. But New Mexico, our losses were spread way further, way into more core small businesses and not just in tourism. And man, we have really struggled to get back the gains that other states around us have certainly had. And then you got to hand it to the Beehive State. They add jobs, and then their students who graduate from Utah colleges go on to work other places. They're like the productive worker engine of the United States.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Utah is a unique state, and there are certainly cultural forces at play there. And New Mexico has cultural challenges. But again, if you can't make a difference with good public policy, or you're not making a difference with the bad public policy, then you might as well just get out of the game entirely. But I suspect that most folks can agree that good public policy will improve things, while bad public policy has a negative impact. So now changing direction a little bit. While there's been a lot of folks out there that have come down with COVID-19, including the President of the United States. Now, we haven't really talked much about COVID-19 because from a policy perspective here in New Mexico, at least for the time being, we could discuss this after the election maybe, see where things shake loose depending on who the next governor is. But in terms of daily deaths, New Mexico has seen a bit of an upsurge. And I'm using worldometers.info data on coronavirus. On July 21st, our 7-day moving average death rate was 19 that particular day. And the rate had kind of increased and has slightly moved downward in the last few days after that. But 19 in one day, and again, this is a rolling average, so 7-day rolling average. First and foremost, it took, remember where we were in 2020, it took until mid-November, basically Thanksgiving in 2020, for us to hit that kind of number way back in 2020. And remember how quickly things shut down. And then we were elevated throughout most of the winter until mid-February, and then we saw another uptick in COVID this particular winter. But in terms of mid-summer COVID issues, in many ways, you could say we're in the worst scenario we've ever seen. Now, real quickly, I don't believe that active cases matter at all. I've never believed that those were something that was a central focus, but now with at-home testing and all kinds of other things, I believe that the case count is 5 to 10 times what the state is reporting, simply because very few people are reporting that data to the state. The testing has moved away from the centralized testing centers where you drive and sit in the car for 2 hours waiting for a test, and you can do it at home. But the death rate is not is a much less fudgeable number, and I think it's interesting the reaction that we've seen, or the lack thereof, by the media and this governor.
Yeah, it's interesting, Paul. I was thinking about this is that our reaction now is similar to the other epidemics and borderline pandemics that we had pre-social media, which was to just kind of ignore it. It has some impact. Some people have it, but go about our business, and that largely is what's happening. And you're right. The case count, I think, means absolutely nothing. There were periods that when things were shut down, I knew of people that had COVID, but I'd never had anyone that I came in any kind of direct contact with, either in person or on the phone or in Zoom or whatever. And now this summer there are a lot of people with COVID, but we're just going on, and we'll see what happens. Not to try to put lipstick on a pig, as it were, and say this could be good. But, it's interesting. This COVID is so unpredictable. It's shown that a lot of the people that are getting sick now are, vaccinated and boosted many times over, still getting it. And if there is some seasonality to it, is having some people get it in the summer when perhaps it's not going to spread as quickly, prevent there from being a huge impact in the winter. These are all things that we don't know, and nobody knows, and even the CDC, they don't like to talk about it very much anymore, because they've been wrong so many times in their prognostications and what's going on, that I think I don't know. I'm sure they would. I'm sure if you go to their website, there's all kinds of prescriptive pronouncements on there. But we're not seeing that happen. In the media, we're not seeing that happen in the public, particularly here in New Mexico.
Much more, dare I say, reasonable approach to the COVID situation than we saw in the hysterical early days. And it probably does feel better for a lot of people to have the vaccine and to kind of know the limitations of social distancing and whatnot. But a lot of these are things, now we didn't know the effectiveness of the vaccine that was to come in 2020, but it never made sense from our perspective to shut down our society entirely when we didn't have a vaccine. And I think we're seeing the economic case for that. Certainly, we've also seen some statistics about mental health among young people, learning loss, et cetera, as well, that, again, just reinforce the correctness of where we were very early on in this whole situation. Now, something else that we've, on a unrelated subject that we've kind of raised some eyebrows at in the past, Secretary of the Interior, former New Mexico Congresswoman and political activist Deb Haaland, on her financial disclosures form, we noted in Forbes magazine that she claimed a zero net worth, which we found to be somewhat questionable with regard to just the idea that a person who had lived on this planet and done some of the professional jobs that she had done, that Deb Haaland would somehow manage to get through life without accumulating any assets whatsoever. Now, a group called Protect the Public's Trust, this article is written up in Breitbart.com. They have filed a complaint calling into question Haaland's 278E financial disclosure, which reported her having no bank account and zero assets, while she made an annual salary of $174,000 and lived in a multi-million-dollar residence. It does note, of course, that Haaland got married earlier, this year, late last year, and that individual has some significant assets. But even in advance of her nuptials, certainly it is hard to see her having an actual zero net worth. And so that complaint has been filed, and it's notable as well that she had issues while she was in Congress regarding her financial disclosures and having to file several addenda to those. And it's just interesting. Like, is it worse that she may have lied on her financial disclosure, or would it have been worse if she actually had no net assets, as one of these very powerful government officials put in place by the Biden administration? It's hard to say, but anyway, somebody else has caught on that zero net assets may have been a little dubious.
Yeah, and in this modern world, without a bank account, it's difficult to have a credit card, and without a credit card, it's difficult to wind your way through the world making purchases. It's tough to spend the net results of $174,000 of a salary without a bank account. So that's one of those. There's got to be more. There's got to be the rest of the story, in the words of Paul Harvey, on this one.
Yeah, and hopefully the ethics complaint has the ability to get some accurate information there. It's definitely interesting, and I can say with confidence that were I in the position of Joe Biden, I would not put somebody in a job who had been on this planet for over 60 years with zero net assets. I just think that highlights potential mismanagement of resources, which, of course, is kind of her job at Department of the Interior. But it's something that is interesting nonetheless, and we'll see. We'll try to keep folks apprised of whatever develops. Now, an issue that we've talked about at some length, but haven't really, the Rio Grande Foundation doesn't really have a position on per se, is the PNM Avangrid merger, which, according to Seeking Alpha, the pretty prominent financial and investing website, the claim is that it is likely to close for a combination of the Iberdrola parent company over in Spain has gotten out from under some lawsuits that were red flags for the PRC in this process that caused them to reject the merger. And then also the fact that, and the Albuquerque Journal did report on this, that you have a new PRC that's going to be named by this governor. They'll take their seats on January 1st, and that the governor has every intention of making this merger happen, and that she will likely place PRC commissioners in office that will approve the merger. So interesting stuff. And they cite stock price evidence as,
Yeah, the market expects this to happen,
Right,
in other
exactly.
words, right? So, yeah, absolutely. So I don't disagree with that position, that Seeking Alpha. It's always good, Paul, that you select a source that has been deplatformed largely because they say things that are not always politically popular.
Oh, I wasn't aware.
No. I mean, Seeking Alpha is is very reputable site. It has a lot of good information on it, and I do think that's the case. And then what will that mean? One thing that the Avangrid companies have done is they've shown really no willingness to own fossil fuel powered plants or nuclear plants any longer than they absolutely have to. And as we talked at the beginning, we've talked a lot. Without wind and without really, 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 really good batteries, something other than wind and solar is going to be necessary for the transition and the Energy Transition Act. And it'll be interesting to see what their strategic approach is to all of the gas-fired electric generation that PNM holds if they do indeed take owners over as the owner of that company.
Yeah. And last, before we leave, here in Albuquerque, it was just announced by Mayor Keller that Coronado Park, the open-air homeless camp, will be shut down in August. Now, this goes right into the category of any policy relating to the so-called homeless situation. And what does that mean? Because like squeezing on the proverbial balloon, if you shut down Coronado Park, which it is an eyesore, it is absolutely horrendous what has gone on there. And Keller finally kind of acknowledged that there is going to be a very serious question as to where do those people go next, and are we going to see some other parks taken over by homeless? Are we going to have the ability to put them somewhere that they will not cause so many problems and the situation not be so destructive and decrepit? And, so I think a tentative thumbs up to closing Coronado Park, hopefully restoring it into an actual park and hopefully enforcing vagrancy and overnight camping laws. But unless you do that kind of universally across the city and take the more aggressive approach that we've advocated on this show, I don't know that you do much to actually address the issue. And, I hate to say it, but you've got to aggressively enforce property rights, rights of way, and all kinds of laws about camping and vagrancy in order to actually move the needle on improving Albuquerque's crisis with regard to these homeless, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and you nailed it. Yeah, is this just it's like we have a big fire of problem burning at Coronado Park, and we're going to go ahead and hit it and put that fire out. But before we do that, we send embers to all the other parks around the region, and what's going to happen there? Is this part of the beginning of a larger strategy with regard to this in Albuquerque, or is this just, a knee-jerk reaction that's going to, at the end of the day, just move the problem elsewhere and let other Albuquerque neighborhoods have their time to share in the fun of having homeless encampments in the parks by their houses?
Yeah, and just to be clear, solving homelessness is probably not something that government is going to do at any level. You need serious societal and personal change in order to do that. But if the city of Albuquerque can enforce basic property rights and other laws, we can start to make inroads in the city of Albuquerque, and that's what needs to be done. I'm not a fan of buying bus tickets for people just to go another place to become another city's problem. If they are legitimately en route from one place to the other, that's a different story. If they have family ties or something, but what we need to do is you've got to make it so the people who are paying the taxes and running the businesses here can live a solid life and not have these kinds of encampments cropping up throughout the city or in other places of the city. A Coronado Park Part 2 in some other park is not the solution here. So that's critical to understand, and hopefully the administration gets that. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.